Biggest losers are China and Germany. Now, we're looking at 70 years of American foreign policy being ripped apart and dissolved over the course of the next few years. Now, everyone thinks that this started with the Trump administration, and as soon as Trump is gone, we'll go back to normal, but no, not in the way that people are thinking. We are going back to a normal international environment. It's not normal in the way that we've traditionally thought about it for the last couple of generations. The problem is that normal is not an international order. In fact, there's only ever been one international order. It is now going away. We're shifting into a period of disorder, which is much more traditionally what the world looks like. Well, you've got to take a step back, way back, really to the beginning of the industrial period, or before if you want to. The point was, there are very few places in the world that have a good geography internally that allows them to consolidate into a single ethnic group and do so in a way that generates wealth. You need flat land, you need good agricultural space, you need a good river so you can move things around in your own system. That doesn't happen in large portions of the planet. And even that isn't quite enough. You have to have significant barriers between you and your neighbors, otherwise you'll tend to get invaded every generation or two. This means that in the world before what we consider normal, there were really only about a dozen significant powers, and they would branch out beyond these core zones as empires in order to conquer large tracts of territory and use those resources to feed their populations, to trade, to have captive markets, and ultimately to outcompete everyone else who's among those 12. This led to wars, a lot of them, constantly. Bigger and badder wars as the industrial period built. Eventually got things like tanks and artillery and ultimately hydrogen bombs. That led to World War II. That brought the entire system crashing down. And of those 12 geographies in the world, only one of them wasn't leveled, and that was the United States. So at the end of World War II, the Americans brought their allies together at Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, and basically held a conference and laid out what the rules of the new age were going to be. So instead of everyone competing for global domination, it's pretty clear the United States held all the tools here, had the only global navy, had the only economy that had survived the war, had the only industrial base. So the Americans proposed a trade. We'll open our markets to you so you can export your way back to affluence. We'll use our navy to patrol the global oceans so that you can buy any product from anywhere in the world, ship it home, process it into finished goods, and then re-export it for hard currency. Will protect the entire supply chain. You're not any longer limited to the territory in which you directly control. You can access everything. And in exchange, all we ask is for the right to protect you from the Soviets. And for all the empires, there was a degree of confusion went up on here. So they're like, okay, let me get this right. You're going to give us for free everything that we have been struggling to achieve ourselves for the last 1,000 years, and you're going to protect us. Deal. That's the Cold War. This is NATO. This is the European Union. This is the Chinese Communist Party. Because the beauty of the Bretton Woods deal was you could extend it to new members at any time. And as the 40s turned into the 50s, turned into the 60s, turned into the 70s, the Bretton Woods alliance continued to expand and expand and expand, providing the economic basis for the Soviet containment strategy. And that lasted right up until the end of the Cold War. The problem is when the Cold War ended, all of a sudden the security strategy needed to be updated, which meant that the global economic system needed to be updated. Because for the Americans, trade wasn't about trade. Trade was about security. That's the bribe you use to get cooperation. The president we had at the time was Herbert Walker Bush, someone who was well positioned in terms of understanding foreign affairs, know how to play it forward. And he put together a team to figure out what's next. How do we take Bretton Woods and update it for this new strategic era? But Americans voted him out of office. And in the next 6 consecutive federal election contests, Americans decisively chose the candidate who celebrated his lack of foreign expertise. So the economic aspects of the Bretton Woods system kind of lingered on. The idea that the US will provide security for global trade, that will lubricate the system financially, that the Americans will be the market of first and last resort. But the idea that there was any sort of quid pro quo, that faded away. And in a series of events, the Americans became disenchanted with the system because now they were subsidizing countries that were no longer under their security umbrella. Places became more powerful, your Brazils, your Indias, especially your Chinas. I would say that the three landmark developments that really put us on a path to ending this system completely happened in the early 2000s. The first was the launching of the euro. Now, there are a number of reasons why the euro is perhaps not the best idea and was not exactly well thought out when it was put together. It was ultimately a political goal to knit the European Union together. Hard to argue with the political goal there. You know, a Europe that's united in peace, I think everybody has an interest in that. But the Europeans also had a clear and somewhat aggressive goal for the euro to displace the US dollar as the sole settler of the global system. Now, the United States looked at this and like, wait a minute. So we're subsidizing your system. We're protecting you from everyone. We're helping you knit Central and Eastern Europe back into the European family. And you want us to pay for it? Now, that didn't really go over very well. And that was one of the first things that kind of led the United States to break away from this global management system, because if the firmest allies we've ever had, the ones that we've poured the most military force and economic strength into supporting, we're now trying to take everything that the Americans did and make it work against the American interests, it was kind of rude. That was step one. Step two is the EP-3, if you remember that event. It was a spy plane that the United States was operating off the coast of China in international waters, and a Chinese fighter pilot collided with it, crashed. The Chinese got the plane, kept the crew for a couple of weeks, and the plane itself for a few months. And the Americans are looking at the Chinese like, look, after we met with Mao, we admitted China into the Bretton Woods family. And the fact that China by that time had already quadrupled its GDP was only possible because the Chinese, for the first time in Chinese history, were united under Chinese history and had access to the international system and were able to grow. And yet, you're trying to push us out of the security envelope. Again, rude. And since then, Chinese relations have steadily gotten worse. Final event, of course, was 9/11. Now, you can argue left, right, and center about how the United States may have mismanaged its response to the 9/11 attacks. But when you look around the world at the countries that chose to cooperate with the United States in American foreign policy in the aftermath of 9/11 and those that didn't, most of our traditional allies were in the no category. This was an issue that for the Americans was considered of paramount importance, and to have countries like France and Germany and Turkey just wanting to stay out of it, the whole idea of Bretton Woods, we subsidize you, but we get control of the security apparatus. The deal was broken. And from 2001 until today, it's been bleeding away. And you can just look at the presidents and how they've acted. So under Bill Clinton, he's the one who inherited the old system. He started to do an update with the World